Good afternoon, Temecula Valley, or should I say, good Christmas morning. It's great to be with you in our first ever, I think, Christmas morning address. At least I'm not aware of there ever having been one before we came. But Jeannie and I are so excited to be a part of this community and to be able to share our first Christmas together with all of you. And, we're not obviously meeting together for worship service in the regular format today, and I wanted to just give you sort of a Christmas address and just turn our minds just for a few minutes to the purpose and the reason for this day. Oftentimes Jesus is referred to in the Bible as the morning star. Of course, there's the passage in 1 Peter, or 2 Peter chapter 1 in verse 19, where Peter describes Jesus as the bright morning star. And Revelation chapter 2 in verse 28, again, he is identified as a star. And of course, numerous times in the Gospels, he refers to himself as the light of the world. And so there's a long tradition, an ancient tradition that goes back even to pre-Christian times that compares Messiah to the morning sun, to the morning, to the dawn, to the daylight, to the sunrise. And if you look all the way back, even in the book of Numbers, when the Israelites were ordered into groups surrounding the tabernacle as they went out into the desert, you'll notice that the tribe of Judah was to be on the east side of the tabernacle, and the text says, on the east toward the sunrise. And so even from pre-Christian history, the history of the tribe of Judah, Jesus' tribe, was that they were looking forward, they were looking up towards the sunrise, and they were moving toward the light. And you'll remember from our discussions of creation and new creation earlier this year that we also had some conversations from the book of Genesis, in particular the creation narrative in Genesis 1 and other texts like that talk about the morning and the evening and the way that they are represented. And the thing that I think stands out to me as we look at that text is it says that there was evening and there was morning each day. There was evening and there was morning. There was evening and there was morning. And the Hebrew word there each time is the word bocher, which means daybreak or to illuminate. And this idea is used so many times in the Hebrew scriptures, the idea of morning as a time of illumination, morning as a time of revelation, that the dawn would break. And in Psalm chapter 1, Psalm 110 in verse 3, the light before dawn, the Mishar, is called the daybreak light. And so this idea of morning and early in the morning and this emphasis on the early part of the day is very, very embedded into our Bibles. Now, for most of us here that live in the West, we understand that our day begins in the morning. We rise up and we go to work. And then our day sort of ends in the evening. But the Hebrews reckoned time differently. They reckoned a day as a unit of time lasting from evening till evening. And so their day actually began, so to speak, in the evening and went overnight into the next morning. And this is a powerful way of viewing time, and it's very different from ours. And what it suggests, I think, is that they evaluated morning and night in different ways than we do. Morning was the beginning part of the light of the day. So instead of morning being the beginning of the day, the evening part was the beginning of the day. And then about halfway through that day, the light came, and it was the light hours of the day. And if you think about that, there's some pretty significant spiritual significance to that. That for them, morning coming in the middle of their day meant that while they were sleeping or while it was dark, they were looking forward to the light. And the light rose slowly and actually overtook the darkness and sort of brought about the bright part of the day. And I know we think, maybe, well, this is a little bit subtle, but if you imagine yourself to be living in a world where they didn't have incandescent lighting or electricity, there's an anticipation with the dawn, and there's a natural cycle. There's a natural looking forward to sunrise because it's the time when you can begin to move about and do things and, of course, work and worship. But for the Hebrews, the morning was marked by worship. That the rising of the sun meant that it's time to get up and to pray. Right? The ancient Hebrews had divided their day into 3 sections. Morning is the beginning of the light. And then the second component is sort of the working time of the day. And then the evening threshold, when the light begins to dim, that is sort of the Sabbath and the rest time of the day. So they had sort of a waking and praising in the morning, a working and laboring in the midday, and then the evening, rest, Sabbath, and looking forward to the next day. And this idea of looking forward to the morning, looking forward to the dawn, was built into the way that they lived their entire lives. So what does this mean for us? This idea of splitting the day into a morning time and an evening time, or a light time and a darkness time. Well, I think there's a few things. First of all, it reminds us that the first act that God did during creation was he separated light and darkness, that God created, if you will, this division. He meant for there to be a light overtaking darkness, that this is a metaphor that we're supposed to see everywhere on the earth all the time, and it's available to any people. Secondly, the early morning was the time to journey, time to travel. There are numerous Old Testament scriptures that talk about this, but it's also the time when war was waged. In Joshua chapter 8 and verse 10, and in 1 Samuel chapter 11, beginning around verse 11, there are major battles that happen, and of course they happen as the sun rises. It's the first time you can see the enemy, and of course you have the duration of the day to do battle. But spiritually speaking, the morning was most notably a time for rejoicing. Psalm chapter 30 and verse 5 talks about how eagerly the morning was awaited, and it symbolized the faithful love of God. It symbolized mercy and justice for his people. Isaiah 33 and verse 2 famously refers to Jesus in this way, that each dawn brings a new day. And it reminds Israel of the freshness, the reliability, the vastness, the power of God's care for his people. And so, of course, Jesus and his disciples, Mark chapter 1 and verse 35 and other places, they get up early in the morning and they go out and they pray. And they kept this tradition of praying early in the morning, that orienting themselves towards the light as it was dawning, upward towards God. And so all of this kind of comes to a head at Christmas, at Advent for us, because Jesus, again, is referred to as the morning star, as the bright morning star. Again, in 2 Peter chapter 1 and verse 19, we hear that we're supposed to pay attention to the apostles' teaching until the morning star rises in our hearts, right? Until Jesus returns. And again, in Revelation 2:28, he is referred to once again as the bright morning star. And so in the New Testament, Jesus takes on this celestial, if you will, identification, that he's one of the stars. He's the brightest of the stars. And so what does all this have to do with Christmas and Christmas Day? You know, it was early in the morning that Jesus rose from the dead. It was early in the morning that the women went to the tomb and found him no longer there. It was early in the morning when Jesus took the disciples out to pray. It was early in the morning when Jesus himself went out to pray. And there is this sense of anticipation that comes with that first morning hour. And certainly all of us should be anticipating the power and the greatness of the coming of Christ. And as much as we here in the Western world tend to think of the coming as the second coming, the significant coming for us as Christians is what we would call Advent, the Christmas season, when Jesus came to rescue his people. He came as the sun. He came as the morning star. He came as light into a place that was dark. He came to separate light from darkness. And he came to remind us to look forward, to look up, to lift our eyes, and to get away from work and labor and having our head down, if you will, down at the task, and to raise our eyes upward so that we can see the light of the gospel, which is the glory of Christ. One final thought. I was reading this morning in Luke and in the birth narrative, which I typically do this time of year, and I noticed something that I'm sure I've seen before, but I thought about it in just a little bit of a different way. And maybe it's a practical takeaway for what it means to anticipate the coming of Christ. There's the text, and all of you are familiar with it, where Mary goes to visit her sister Elizabeth, and at this time both of them are with child. Mary is bearing, of course, Jesus Christ, and Elizabeth is bearing John the Baptist. And so the two women are sisters, they're related, and so there's a kinship, there's a family relationship between Jesus and John. And as Mary arrives, what the Bible says is that the baby in Elizabeth's womb leapt for joy in experiencing the presence of his fellow prophet, Jesus, his cousin. And I thought that was so cool that even in utero, even before John was born, that John the Baptist had this innate sense that when Jesus entered his presence, even pre-birth, that he experienced joy. He experienced a reaction, that he was anticipating even before he was born, that the Son of God would also be born, and that he would see him and know him and have a relationship with him. And so as we come to the close of our season of Advent, I just want to encourage us to continue to anticipate what God can do. Look forward to the ways that we will see Jesus in 2023 and the ways that he invites us to meet him and connect with him and experience him. And that even though we are already born, we can experience the anticipation of what it will be like to meet Jesus again, whether it's on the Emmaus Road or in our scriptural time, our time in the scriptures alone, or in times of prayer with the community, or in times of service where we're putting hands and feet to the words of Jesus. All the things that we're going to do as a community this year, I want you to look forward to each of those as a time, as a moment when you also can experience the new Advent, the new coming of Christ. Jean, I love you so much. We're so encouraged and proud of the work that God is doing here in the church and the love that all of you have for us and for one another. And we wish you a very Merry Christmas and a new year filled with blessings and the anticipation of great things that God will do.